Hello everyone, are we live? Yup, we are. So, hello, greetings to all delegates. Welcome to the training session that you have been so eagerly waiting for. So, let me just get started with introductions. My name is Pankaj Mirchandani. I'm the Under Secretary General for Research and Development at Mumbai MUN. Guys, you can go ahead.
I'm Arang Jomraj. I'm the Undersecretary General for Research and Development as well.
Myself, Rashi Vez, I'm the Under Secretary General for Research and Development.
And I'm Ujwal Sharma. I am also the Under Secretary General for Research and Development. We all are.
And we four are the heads of the R&D team at Mumbai MUN. And you must be wondering that in other MUNs, we don't have these kinds of sessions where the OC is taking a training session. So this training session is just to get new delegates as well as older delegates up to speed. Our aim with this is to basically create more of a level playing field with everything. What we want to achieve here is higher debate quality across Mumbai MUN, and of course give the new people who have applied for the first time in the MUN, give them some confidence, give them a chance to win. And yeah, just get started with the session then. After this session, we'll be sending a Google Meet link, so you can join that link. You can ask us any doubts that you have regarding anything that is discussed in the section, in the session and beyond. And this session does has major parts about RoP. It has about research, about lobbying, and every single aspect that you can expect from an MUN. So yeah, let's get started then. Okay. So I'll just give you a brief overview of what a model UN is. So this is an educational simulation of the way that a UN committee functions. So for example, we have a Security Council, we have a Human Rights Council that are debating things that are going on geopolitically, that things that are going on in the international community, or things that are even going on within certain countries, and these people are here to solve problems. It is basically providing a platform to every single country to come out to speak and just collaborate together and work together with an altruistic goal of just doing better for humanity. So when participating in a model UN, you are gaining new skills that are not even often taught in a traditional classroom setting. So I'll just go over these skills. So first of all, and the most important, which I think is critical thinking. Right now, we have an aspect of the world where people don't think for themselves. They are following sheep thinking. And this certainly leads certain people into downfalls. And critical thinking becomes really necessary here because you're thinking independently, you're thinking for yourself, you're making new ideas. And yeah, that is a very important part. Next thing is communication. So when you're communicating with other people, even myself, when I started doing MUNs, I wasn't that good at it. And slowly and steadily, I got the nerves off of me. I developed some communication skills. I could speak extremely promptly. And that is what MUNs get you. Third is research. Now, this is quite an important aspect because you are delving into things that you may not have seen before, even though you are selecting agendas that you might know things about or things that you're interested in. Often MUNs force you into a space where you have to learn about new things, and it just expands your general knowledge base, and expansion of your knowledge base leads to diverse perspectives across the world. The fourth point is collaboration. Now you cannot win any MUN by yourself. You need a sense of collaboration, you need a sense of diplomacy, you need to collaborate with other people to work, may it be agendas, may it be speeches, may it be getting voting votes from different people in your committee. And that is what collaboration brings you. Of course, leadership is an extremely important quality. When you are in an MUN, you need to guide a bunch of people. You need to be the voice that stands out, and that is something it forces you into. Public speaking, once again, for many of you, you must be here because you want to get rid of the nerves and you want to get rid of the fear that you have when you're speaking in public. And MUNs will certainly push you for that. So, yeah, this is a brief overview. So, now we'll move on to the official and working languages. For AIPPM, the official working languages are Hindi and English both. Other than that, every single committee will have the official working language as only English. And other than this, AIPPM and World Bank, and also maybe ILC will have a separate RoP. This RoP will be explained to you by the chairs. Especially for World Bank, we have an instruction from the chair that just to focus on the research aspect, and the ROP will be decided on the day of the committee. So just to get so let's get into the aspects of what an MUN is. So first of all, the executive board. The executive board consists of three members. That is the chair, the vice chair, and the rapporteur. Now, the chair, vice chair, and rapporteur may be named something else within your committee. The president, vice president. Maybe they are co-chairs. In AIPPM, we have a moderator, co-moderator, and the rapporteur is named as the scribe. So a chair has complete control of the proceedings. They are the ones who will be giving you your awards. They are the ones who are judging you, and they moderate every single meeting. They see that the MUN does not turn into a yelling competition. They moderate discussions. They make decisions, important decisions on the committee and the flow of the committee. They may also give you feedback. They rule on points or motions, and they ensure that all the rules of an MUN are being followed in the committee. All procedural matters in the committee are subject to the discretion of the chair, and they may undertake any action that is not covered in the rule of procedures since they have complete power over the committee. Again, the chair, vice chair, and the rapporteur work together, and they basically form the crux of the committee and ensure that the MUN conference goes in the flow that is pre-decided and it goes well. So yeah, we'll move on to the next part now, which is lobbying. Arank, you can take over.
So moving on to the next part, what is lobbying? So lobbying is just a formal way of saying socializing or talking to other delegates or other members of the committee itself. Basically, this is the part of the MUN which Pankaj mentioned earlier will train your leadership skills, it'll train your social skills, and even your communication skills to a heavy extent. So this is basically involving talking to other delegates. This could be in breaks, it could be in sessions called unmoderated caucuses, which we'll talk about later. But this basically also explains the stances of, you can explain the stance of your country, and you can also talk to other delegates about what goals they have, any solutions they want, or you can also talk about making any groups or something known as blocks, which is basically working with many countries if you believe in the same solutions. So that is lobbying in a MUN. Just before we move on to the rest of the actual technicalities, just a few keywords to understand. First is procedural, substantive, and then we'll also talk about the voting. So procedural are aspects in the MUN which are relevant, which require mandatory voting by all people of the committee. Why is this necessary? Because it's needed for the procedure. These could be things such as voting on moderated caucuses or having to raise a motion for a moderated caucus. And there are also other things called substantive things. Substantive aspects, and these are basically mandatory only for people who have voted present and voting for the session in the roll call. The roll call is something we'll get into later. Just understanding these two things, procedural and substantive, they'll be mentioned throughout the PPT as well, so you'll understand which aspects, particularly in your committee, will be procedural and will be substantive. Next, there are two types of votings. Both are used for different things. The first is a 50+1 vote, which is a simple vote. Basically, it means if your committee, let's say, has 40 people, you will need 21 people to vote in favor for it to pass, which is 50% of 40+1. And the other type of voting is a special voting, which is a two-third majority, which basically means 2/3 of the delegates have to vote for a certain favor or a certain aspect to pass in the MUN. Now, moving on to roll call. The roll call is something that we do at the start of every session. It is, you can think of it very informally as an attendance. And basically, every delegate would be called one by one by their portfolio using a matrix or using anything, but every delegate will be called upon. And there are three things you can say. You can say present or voting, and usually abstain, but we will not entertain abstain because it means you are not there in committee. So mainly two things you can say, which is present or present and voting. So it'll be like, let's say you're the delegate of USA or the delegate of France, the chair or the EB, which Pankaj mentioned earlier, they'll call out your name and you can raise your placard and you can say present or voting, either of the two. What do they basically mean is that someone saying present, only present by itself, not present or voting, can vote for, against, or they can even abstain, which means not give an opinion. Like they will not be for or neutral. It's kind of an abstain. It's a kind of a neutral opinion where you don't choose to give for or against on any aspect, on substantive aspects. And the other thing is present and voting, where you cannot abstain. Like let's say you have to vote on something, you will have to give a for or an against in a substantive thing. This is again for substantive aspects. For procedural aspects, you will have to, all delegates will have to vote for or against. So now setting the agenda. So many of you all would have seen the agendas on our Insta post. You would have received it on your mails with your allocations as well. And you would have noticed for many committees, there are two agendas. So which one do we discuss? How do we go about it? Do we discuss both? Do we discuss one? Basically, the agenda is set at the start immediately. The committee has to adopt one of the agendas, and it can finish that agenda and move on to the next over the course of 3 days, or it can also just discuss one agenda completely, or it can discuss the second agenda completely. That's completely up to how the committee goes, but it starts by adopting an agenda to start with. So it would be somewhere you'll have to raise your placard and you'll have to say the motion in order would be the nation of, let's say I'm the delegate of USA. It would be the delegate of USA moves this, the agenda one be placed first on the agenda. And you would list your agenda, of course. So you'll have to basically choose one of the agendas, and delegates will vote on this. And again, looking at the voting style of this, this would be 2/3 of majority. So 2/3 of your committee will have to agree upon you to go into agenda one or agenda two. And once that is done, we'll move into discussing those specific agendas. So looking at motions are basically aspects of the committee or aspects of the MUN that literally in the term make the MUN flow. It's how the flow of the MUN continues from start to finish over the 3 sessions. And there is a certain fixed way or a formal way of actually making a motion. And a motion could be for many different things that we'll talk about later. But there's a formal way where you could start by talking about the chair. You have to say that you're the delegate of, let's say, USA or India or China, and you'll have to raise a motion to do something. So let's say I want to raise a motion to go into formal debate and talk about the general speakers list, which is something that's coming ahead. But you'll have to say it very formally, such as the delegate of USA raises a motion to move into formal debate to discuss the general speakers list with a speaker time. And this is basically a formal way, and you can see an example is written here. So always you'll have to refer to yourself as a delegate of your country. You cannot say I want to raise a motion or something like that. You'll have to say that the delegate of USA wants to raise a motion for this or moves into formal session. And it's only, these motions are only entertained when the chair will explicitly say are there motions on the floor. So don't worry on the day. Your EB is there to help you, and he will explicitly make sure that you know when to raise these motions, or if you are not following this format, he'll make sure that the format is actually followed well. Yeah. This is the debate structure again. Just to go quickly, it'll be divided into two main parts, which is formal and informal debate. So in formal debates, we have two things called GSLs and SSLs, which Rashi will continue and she'll explain the rest of this.
Right. Hello. So talking about the debate structures, since it's divided into formal and informal debate, you could sort of think of it as a river flowing continuously, right? So the GSL, which is the general speakers list, is sort of the continuous flow of the committee, which will keep happening in regular intervals. Now, when we talk about moderated caucus and unmoderated caucus, now the simple difference in that is the moderated caucus will be moderated by the executive board, and during the unmoderated caucus, the executive board will not be there in the session. Basically, the formal rules would not apply. So you all can think of this as the tributaries of a river. Certain slight deviations in the formal procedure, it is sort of the how the tributaries join the river. Now, in moderated caucus, what could happen is that you all could come up with certain subtopics of the agenda which are relevant to be discussed. Now, essentially, motions are raised for the same. So you all could decide the time duration for each speech in that as well, which can also be done in the GSL. It could be of 60 seconds or of 90 seconds, depending on which delegate is raising the motion and then how it is passed. Now coming on to the actual distinction. So starting with formal debate, as I explained GSL. Now what is SSL? That is a special speakers list. In that, what happens is that it is a modified version of the GSL which zooms in on a specific subtopic. So the basic motion of it is the same. In talking about informal debate, which is divided into moderated and unmoderated caucus, during the moderated caucus, topics which are relevant to your agenda will be the main substantive content of discussion. So that is something that you all could potentially think about before. You all could refer to the study guides that have been shared to you all, which will have a lot of background information that is going to help you all to identify certain key areas that could be discussed. Now coming on to the yielding time. So as I said, your time could be decided depending on your motion, right? It could be 60 seconds, 90 seconds, or any time that is passed in the motion. Now, after you finish your speech, there is a possibility that certain time is remaining. Now, there are four ways that you could yield that time. First is yield to questions. So as soon as you have finished your speech, if you yield it to questions, the chair will select one delegate who will be willing to ask questions in regards to your speech, and then you could answer that questions. Now, if you yield it to another delegate, all of your remaining time, for example, if it was a 90 seconds GSL, if you spoke for 60 seconds, the remaining 30 seconds will be yielded to a delegate of another country. Now, coming to the third point, which is yield to the chair. Now, there are two options over here. If you wish to yield to comments, then you could directly yield it to certain delegates who wish to ask you questions. Now, but if you feel that your speech should not be subjected to comments at that point of time, you could directly yield it to the chair. And then the chair will decide to move on to the next speaker. Now, how the recognition works during GSL is when the motion is passed, the chair will be asking the delegates to raise their placards. So all of you all will be getting placards with your portfolio on it, and you all could raise it. And depending on the time that you all have raised in, the chair will be noting down the recognition, and that is the same order in which the GSL or any other SSL or the moderated caucus speech will be processing. All right, so these are a few points that you could keep in mind, which would be really helpful for you all during the entire process of the MUN. So the first is point of personal privilege. Now, what could happen sometimes is you all might not be able to hear somebody else's speech. They might be a bit far and it might not be audible, or any other issue that you all. It could be something related to, if you want to use the restroom or anything of that sort. In that case, just raise a point of personal privilege and let the chair know regarding to whatever it is, and it will be sorted out. The second is the point of inquiry. Now this is so in general, during the committee, as the committee progresses, you all might have a few doubts related to the RoP. So that is something that you all can clarify with the chair by raising a point of inquiry at any given point. The third is the point of order. So during the committee, if you feel that there is certain areas where the RoP is not adhered to, or there are some deviations which you are a bit doubtful about, it is better to raise a point of order and clarify it with the chair. And then the chair, it is, however, the chair may decline this at their discretion. So do keep that in mind. The fourth is the point of information. So now, as I mentioned before, once you give your speech, you all could yield it to other delegates to ask questions, right? So when the delegates ask questions, it is points of information. So what could happen is there could be certain, maybe, certain factual things that they want to confirm about your speech, or certain other things relating to that particular agenda and relating to what you've spoken is something that they would want to ask questions about and get clarity about. So that is essentially point of information. This could also be raised during moderated caucus when when you all are zooming in on a specific subtopic and the speeches are done. That is when the actual debate part of it will start. So this will be going on then as well. So that concludes the points, the yielding time, and the debate structure. Now,
Right. So regarding the working paper, so before we move on to the working paper and the rest of the segment, I want to clarify that the paperwork for any committee will be subject to which committee you're in, the structure they will follow, the structure the chairs decide on. So before moving on to what the general structure is, this can change significantly depending on committee to committee. Uh, Okay, so basically, what is a working paper? A working paper is when you've started your discussion, you started talking to each other, when you've come to a consensus on what you believe should be the goal of the committee, or at least your block has. You decide to write a working paper. This is a rough document that kind of lists out what you believe should the solutions be, what you believe the committee should adopt, and regarding essentially anything. So whatever you've talked about during committee session that you wish to pass on, that's the stuff that you put into a working paper. Generally there are two authors, at least two authors, and for it, so what a signatory is? A signatory is somebody you need to kind of write down and then signify, okay, this is something I want to be discussed. Two authors basically means that they're the people who will be recognized as the major contributors to the paper. The signatories are somebody who've kind of added in content, and also wish for the paper to be discussed. So any of the two, signatory can be any of the two. So if you've got two authors and if you've got at least five signatories, that's when it's introduced to the committee, and that's when it's shared with the committee, saying that okay, here is what these guys suggest, here is what you can do. Generally, five working papers are entertained. Up to five papers are entertained. Generally, the structure kind of also involves a mixing and merging of the working papers in the future, which I will clarify further on. So you can name it anything. In general, you can name it anything. Something that means something is generally recommended, but it's your prerogative as to what you want to name it and what you do not want to name it. So yes. Uh, okay, so when you want to introduce a working paper, there is a verbatim for that. So when you raise a motion to discuss a working paper or to introduce a working paper, you have to call it motion to introduce a working paper 1.1. So 1.1 basically means is the first working paper introduced and is the first iteration. So that is working paper 1.1. Somebody else can then kind of cover on further and further. Okay. Then you have voting. So voting is obviously, since you've already gotten a few people in, few people as signatories. Generally, 2/3 on top of those signatories are required to kind of approve that okay, we want this to be discussed. We want people to kind of talk about it. We are willing to discuss this right now. A Q&A session then follows once you've introduced the working paper. People kind of quiz you on it. Of course, if you do not want a quiz paper, if you want to discuss it clause by clause, that's an option. But generally, you do follow a question and answer session. So what generally happens is people quiz you on okay, you've written this. Why have you written this? So that kind of allows them to quiz you on the clauses they find problematic, or to kind of talk regarding that, so that you can clarify any of their queries. So if you are actually one of the people who are sitting in looking at a working paper, this is the way you contribute. If it's a question and answer session, you guys can ask questions to the person who's presenting the paper by asking them, okay, clause number so and so, you've written this. Can you please clarify what that means? Or do you believe that is fair under this context? So that is something you can do. It is debatable again. So the reason why it's debatable is because people can then comment on your paper. And generally, it's very simple to pass a question and answer session is generally a very simple system, 50-50. So if you remember, simple voting basically just means 50-50. So 50 people, yes. If you have a 51st person saying yes, then you're free to open up a session. Before you move on to discussion, you generally do close the formal debate because you've kind of exhausted the GSL and all of the rest of the syllabus, and now you've entered the general normal discussion phase of the working paper. So yes. A draft reso is when you've converted a working paper into one entire comprehensive paper that you wish that people will then be able to vote on. So your working paper can kind of convert directly to a system where you can just directly consider it. Okay, it's a draft reso now because I want people to vote on it. I think it's good enough as it is right now. Obviously, you can make changes to your working paper, but you cannot change a draft reso at the point of its voting. So yes, generally there are two segments. There is a segment where you have preamps, and there is a segment where you have declarative clauses. We'll come to in a bit. I'll explain what those mean also in just a minute. But yes, so before you've introduced a draft reso, generally EBs like to review it because if a draft reso is not up to the mark or if it doesn't follow the procedure, it cannot pass. So that's up to the EB's discretion. So when you're deciding to raise a motion for a draft reso pass, ensure that your draft reso knows it. Regarding this system, again, simple deal. If you want to vote on it, it's a simple majority. If you get the 51st person to vote on it, you can decide to vote on it. Again, there is a Q&A session that you can introduce for this as well, or you can do a clause by clause explanation of the draft reso. Again, same deal, similar to your working paper. Then we move on to the draft reso. So you remember I talked about preamps and declaratives. So preamps basically mean this is stuff that I believe in, this is stuff that I'm calling upon, stuff that I want to declare beforehand, stuff that I want a person who's reading this to note beforehand before we move on to the paper. So generally you start off by a draft reso structured by your topic, your the people who've written it, so the authors or the sponsors. So the sponsors are generally the same as your authors. Then you have signatories, people who want this paper to be discussed, people who've contributed to this paper, and then you have your preamps followed by declarative. So solutions are your declarative clauses. So there is really no limit for the general number of pages. Your EB may have a preferred number of pages. They may have an upper end to the number of pages, especially considering this is generally towards the end of the entire debate. So once you've gone through the MUN, this is generally towards your last session or your second last session, or in the middle of your session, if you've decided at least you want to end one agenda, we'll move on to the other one. If you've arrived at the conclusion, that's when you have this entire system. So depending on your EB, on your chair, on your vice chair, and your rapporteur, that generally ends up the general structure of your draft reso. There are certain preamps phrases that we use. Those are listed out here. They are freely available on the internet also. So if you just type in preambulatory phrases, you should be able to find a good reference page. So yes. Okay, operative clauses are the same as your declarative clauses. So it's when you are writing solutions, that when you're talking about actionables, when you're talking about stuff that you want the committee to note as you having done in this committee session, as you having contributed to this committee session, that's when you use these phrases. So accepts, affirms, approves, all of these will then be taken as further fact for fact, a procedure for the next when the next session comes up, and then the next group of people decide to debate in the actual UN. So that is the reason why we have these operative clauses, is because we talk about actionables. It declares exactly what you're doing. So every word has a specific meaning, and generally use it for a very specific cause. So if you're using a particular word, understand what it means, look into what you're talking about, and only then make use of it. That is a general recommendation for everybody. So yes. And then again, you can amend it. So remember how I talked about you can't make changes to a draft result? That's on the time of voting. But before voting, people can decide, what, to give you recommendations. They can give you addition recommendations, they can give you deletion recommendations, they can give you modification recommendations. And the reason why this is generally done is if there is only one clause that is stopping a country from voting yes for your resolution, they can tell you, we don't like this clause. This is their method of telling you, either dissenting or saying, okay, you know what, this is a nice addition, or modifying by saying this could be slightly problematic, this is the better thing. So it helps them feel more confident in your paper. And also it is kind of up to you to accept or not accept. There are generally two kinds of changes that can be done. There are friendly changes and there are unfriendly changes. So friendly changes is something that you say, okay, you know what, that's a nice addition, we believe in it, we are going to take it. But if there is an unfriendly agreement, that is when at least one of the authors says, no, this is not something I want in the paper. So in this such a manner where one of these authors says, no, we do not want this, or my country does not believe that this should be an agreement that should be in the same paper, that is when you go to voting, and your chair and your at least 20% of the quorum says, okay, we want this. Note, this is also sometimes why people who are writing the resolutions do not vote yes for, because there may have been an unfriendly agreement that kind of unfriendly amendment that kind of changed their mind about, okay, no, I cannot vote for this because this will harm my country. So yes, again, simple voting procedures generally depends on EB also. Remember, everything that is kind of being talked about in the segment really depends on how the EB decides to proceed. So yes, paperwork and these procedural things really do depend on the EB. Then we have the resolution paper. So that is after you've passed, after you've introduced it, after you've passed it, once you've read it, that is your resolution paper. So it is when you've added all the amendments, when you've added all the solutions, when you're no longer going to make any further edits. That is when you've formed a resolution paper. Then when you're making no changes further. So obviously, when you're talking about the previous segment, there are draft resolution paper, people can recommend changes. Remember, you may not be able to directly make the changes then and there. You have to submit a procedure to saying, we want an addition clause, we want a deletion of a clause, we want a modification of clause. But in a resolution paper, you can't do that. Resolution paper is the final product that you're getting. So yes, generally simple procedure, and substantive voting, which basically means it's been covered earlier. But yes, in general, that's the general idea of a resolution paper. You vote on it afterwards. Okay, when you're talking about voting, you generally either say yes, say no, or you can abstain. So remember, if you said voting, you are present and voting, you can only say yes or no. That means you can either agree with it or you can disagree with it. but you have no option to say I don't have a say in this because you said you have a say in this. On the other hand, if you say present, if you've said present, you can kind of decide to, okay, you know what, we will either vote yes or no. Now again, when you're voting on such a paper, there are a few things you can do. Right now, this will again depend on the EB whether they wish to maintain the same same level of this thing. So you can either say yes, which basically means okay, I'm okay with this, no more, no, I don't want to say anything. You can say no, I don't agree with this, but I do not have anything to say on this, I just don't want to say, it's a no. Then you can say yes with rights, which basically means I want to talk. I want to. I agree with this, and I want to say yes, so that there can be a separate round. So people who decide, we want to pass in this first round of voting to make up our minds. So a person who said yes with rights then gets some time to speak and to defend why they voted yes. Same with no with rights. So somebody who said no with rights, that means that person said no and they wish to speak on it. So the no with rights person also gets to speak. Generally, the people who say yes with rights and no with rights are people who've had who've written the paper, or people who believe very strongly about a paper, or people who are very strongly affected by a paper. Right, so these are the nations who kind of generally use yes with rights and no with rights. And once they've said their say, uh, there is a second pass. So people who said pass in the first round, they said, we want some time to think about it. They are the people who then have to say, okay, yes, no, or you, you can't really pass at this point because that's the last round. So yes. uh can we move on? Yes. uh in the end, you close the debate. So once everything is done, once you've passed a resolution, you decide, okay, we're done with this aspect of the debate, we're done with this committee, and we're done with this first agenda. So okay, we're done. You can then close the debate. So there's a motion to close the debate. Once there's somebody who also agrees with you, there are two people who can then say, you know what, if you say no, you can then decide to speak against it. So if I don't want the session to be closed just now, I believe there is something that we need to do beforehand, or I believe there's something for the committee to do, I can then speak against it. Generally, if you have two-thirds majority, you can then you know close the debate. So the people who speak against the motion speak before this motion is passed. So yes, so before this motion is voted on. So that becomes the end of the debate, and that's when your committee ends generally. uh, can we move on? Cool. After that, the session is adjourned by the EB. Right, so you can then obviously you're waiting till the next committee session before the closing of the sessions. Is basically you're saying this session is ended and we will come back to it later. uh, Adjournment of the meeting is basically when you're done with the entirety of the committee as a whole, when you believe there is nothing more to be discussed, when it's completely done, your entire committee is over, there is no more to be conducted. That is the adjournment of the meeting, that is the adjournment of the council or the committee. So that is something that the EB does. So again, it requires a two-third majority. Once you've got it, you adjourn the meeting. That's the very final thing that you do. Okay, now if you don't like the agenda, so we're discussing an agenda right now. Let's assume there are two people who are talking, that there are two agendas to be discussed. So you've obviously seen some of the agendas. A lot of you guys have two agendas. If you've got two agendas, if you were discussing one and you don't see it moving towards a conclusion or a resolution, and you don't believe that this is the right way to be spending the time, you can table the topic. You can obviously start a motion to table the topic, and then you can come back to it later, and you can then decide, okay, we'll come back to it later, or we don't want to discuss it right now, we'll come back to it later, and then you move on to the second agenda. You start a second agenda, you start speaking on it, you start discussing it. So a tabled motion is something that's pending discussion, but you don't want to do the discussion now, you want it later. Again, once this is seconded, people who wish for the motion, people who believe that the debate, that the agenda should be tabled and discussed later, two people can speak for that motion who believe that it should be tabled, and then two people can say why it should not be tabled. So they have the opportunity to convince the committee whether they believe it should or should not be tabled. After that, you go to voting. Once you voted, again, if two-thirds say yes, we want to table the agenda, it gets tabled. Nobody can really stop that from happening. So yes, that is tabling the agenda. In the end, I could actually invite everybody to come in also, but essentially your research, what should you focus on? You as a delegate, what should be your area of focus? Should be you should focus on your country. So if you've gotten a country, focus on understanding your country policies, understanding what your country wants. Obviously your study guide topic, what have you gotten to speak about. So in your study guide is the topic of your committee, the functions of what you should do. This is also what the WB chairs meant, the World Bank chairs. And every committee that's slightly different, like ILC would want you to do, they would want you to heavily focus on your topic, your content area. Obviously your committee, understanding what your committee does, because sometimes you may start researching about topics that your committee can't really do. So if I'm in WB and if I start saying let's siege the US, I can't really do that because that's not my prerogative. So, you know, understand what your committee does. Obviously, decide on what you want to recommend, and also look at what's been done already. So so that you're not recommending something that's already been done. Understand who you should ally with, who you should not ally with. So there was a question in the question about how should you form blocks, and if you understand what policies align with your country and who you should side with, that is generally you know that is generally the way you form your block. And you should also focus on your current data. So when you're talking about if when you're deciding, okay, this is something we want to do, you should understand that, okay, this is the data behind it and this is why we want to do this. So statistical data is something you can also put your emphasis on. So yes, all of that makes you a fully formed delegate, well
Uh,
informed delegate.
Yeah, just to add on to that, we have already published all study guides for all committees, barring IPC. So I would suggest all the delegates to please look into the study guides. If you look at the study guides, on the footnote, you will find particular sources that we have referred to. Please go into those sources, check out the things. If you want to know anything in further detail, please do further research. These study guides will provide you with an extremely good base to do very well in your committee. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'd
Additionally,
like to add on to what Pankaj said. The study guide does act as a really good base, and once you read through it, you'll know what all aspects the agenda will cover also. So, let's say if you're looking at a certain agenda and you're seeing one specific subtopic of it, let's say technology or the challenges, or let's say any logistics issue, you can maybe afterwards search what your country specifically is doing. So, it's basically a base of understanding all the relevant subtopics and then understanding what your specific country can do towards that issue or that specific topic. So, it's a good way to start your research.
Additionally, something that was mentioned by Ujjwal regarding what the committee can do and cannot do, that is something that comes under mandate, which is also mentioned in the study guide. So that is also something you can go through to get a general understanding. Additionally, there are case studies and there are a lot of other resources that is going to guide you in a direction where you can understand what sort of situations have occurred in countries, and what are sort of country positions on various agendas that can help you sort of get a starting direction in where you have to research for your own portfolio. So that is something that you all should keep in mind. And also, we are in consultation with the executive board regarding the questions a resolution must answer, which will also be added in the delegate resources.
We hope you kind of took away something from the session. We hope we were able to help you. And yes,
Other than that, as Rashi said, we will be sending you karmas. We will be sending you the expectations of the chair. So please look out for that too. That will be sent to all of your mails, just like the study guide. And yeah, we hope to see you at the conference and hope to see you win.
best of
We will
luck to you.
create a Google Meet link for all of your queries and send it on the respective committee groups. So if you have any queries, do join in and we will see you there. For everybody else, thank you so much for joining.